Hello, and welcome to everyone joining us here at the Felixstowe Book Festival with me, Polly Clark, and Anna Sampson. And we're going to be talking about this beautiful poetry anthology, Night Feeds and Morning Songs, which Anna is the editor of. And the format's going to be that we'll be chatting together, Anna and me, for an hour or so, and around the themes raised by the poems in the book, such as how women's voices haven't been heard, how motherhood was not even until recently maybe even a proper subject for literature. Now there's a lot about it, but not so much in the past, and the solace and community we can find in poetry. And also parenting during a pandemic, which I think will resonate with a lot of people. We'll also be reading some of these absolutely wonderful poems which Anna has compiled in the book, from contemporary poets, and also some shining treasures that you've managed to winkle from the past, Anna, as well. You can text us questions at any time, and they come up on our little screen, and we can store them up for later, or we can try and answer them as we go. So please just text away if you've got a question as we talk. And thank you also to Stephen for his brilliant technical wizardry, which you can't see, but he's been doing such a lot behind the scenes. And you can also buy the book through your local bookshop, but we'll also be telling you how else to do it on screen. So without further ado, I'll just briefly introduce me and then introduce Anna, and then we'll get down to talking about the book. My name is Polly Clark, and I suppose I've got a fair amount of skin in this game. I'm the author of Larchfield, which was about a young mother and the poet W.H. Auden, who meet across time in the Scottish town of Helensburgh. And also Tiger, which features a Siberian tigress who becomes the king tiger of a vast tract of Siberian wilderness whilst raising her cubs alone. So quite an animal motherhood story in there. I've got a 14-year-old daughter, which I suppose speaks for itself. And this subject runs deep in my poetry as well. I guess because it's the one universal subject, because we all have a mother. So about Anna. Anna has edited 8 poetry anthologies, including I Wandered Lonely as a Cloud, which was the 3rd best-selling poetry title of 2009. She is Fierce, which was a #1 Amazon category bestseller. And most recently, this one. I'll show you again, because it's look at that. I love how it shines. It's beautiful. Which is a collection of poetry about motherhood. She writes and speaks often about books and poetry in the media, and has spoken about motherhood and creativity and the hidden history of women's writing at bookshops, festivals, libraries, schools, and literary events. Anna lives with her husband, 2 young daughters, and 2 middle-aged cats, and also works as a literary publicist. So welcome to everybody, and hello, Anna. There she is.
Hi.
See her now.
My background is not nearly as lovely as yours.
I think we've got it all covered. We've got the kind of we've got all possible good backdrops covered. So I wonder if we could maybe start by just you telling us a bit about the journey to compiling this anthology, because you're an experienced anthologizer, but this is quite a strange melding of subject matter and circumstance, isn't it? How you came to do it?
Yes. So I have edited 2 collections of poetry by women, which is She is Fierce and She Will Soar. And when I was editing She is Fierce, I had 2 children under 5, so I was very much in the trenches of motherhood. Parenting was very much on my mind, and I kept finding all these wonderful poems about motherhood. And my editor had to be quite, discipline me and say, well, we can't have lots of these because this is supposed to be a book that will speak to girls and women at any stage of their lives. And of course, when you're parenting 2 children under 5, it's quite difficult to see over the top of that to any other stage of your life. I said, okay, yeah, took it on board, and I kept them sort of in the back of my mind, I'd always thought, oh, I'd love to do something with these. And during 2020, which was obviously quite an intense parenting year for anyone who was at home with their children, which I was, Sam Eads, who is the editor at Trapeze Books, really got in touch with me on Twitter to say, and I think it was in pure sympathy for the tweets that I had done about the behaviour of my 4-year-old, who I like to call a drama empress because I don't think Queen quite covers it. And she said, oh, I think you should edit an anthology of poems about motherhood. And I said, oh, I've really wanted to do that for ages. So I was really thrilled to have the commission. And we had 2 choices, which was we did it, you know, fairly swiftly so that it could go to print and be out for Mother's Day this year, 2021. Or we could do it at a more sedate pace and have it out for the following year. And Sam is a very good editor and flattered me and said, oh, you know, you're a hard worker. We can do this. I believe in us. And of course I went, oh, yes, I am. Yes, I'm very capable. Of course we can do all this.
I could do anything in the pandemic. Yeah.
Yeah. So while homeschooling 2 children who were sort of 3 and 6 and 4 and 7, depending on when in the year we were, solo because my husband works long hours on a building site, and holding down my other job, which is a part-time job in-house at a publisher, I edited this book. So I was immersing myself in these amazing poems about motherhood while being very squished up against the glass, you know, very, very close to motherhood in a way that I felt like I hadn't been since those sort of mad days of maternity leave with very young children, and sort of never being alone, even on the toilet. And it was a really interesting experience, and also really wonderful experience to be reading all these poems, which brought back to me, you know, I'd be reading them sort of weeping and then shouting at my children, please be quiet, I have to work. You know, brought home to me the wonder and the beauty and the loveliness and the funniness of parenting at a time when I, like a lot of other parents and particularly mothers, I think, was finding that quite hard to keep a hold of.
And I think it's wonderful that in the book you've covered all that emotional range. So, you know, the sort of the joy and that emotional wonder that we have about our children, but you've also, you know, you've got the section on sleep. Well, as in it should be like no sleep, because it's yes. Kind of what then characterizes. And then you've also got the stages as well, haven't you? All the way from pregnancy right through to the empty nest. So it's possible through all these poems to follow that complete journey, isn't it? So you yeah. I think it's interesting that, you know, because I'd like to come back a bit later on to that idea of the work of motherhood and how that's been intensified over the pandemic and how that's kind of come reflected in some of your choices, but also the what you discovered about what poems are available, because I guess as an anthologist, you know, I mean, there's a poem for everything, really, isn't there? And a poem for every time, and there are some subjects which are less enormous than motherhood, which you would, you know, so well, I mean, nature, maybe that's as enormous as motherhood, and there's
plums in the icebox.
Yeah.
Seems a small thing compared to motherhood.
You didn't have, so you had quite an interesting sort of discovery, didn't you, about just what poems there are about it?
I always, in an anthology, really like to include older poems as well as contemporary voices, and I just think it's just much more interesting to me, and it's lovely to rediscover, particularly with the she's, to rediscover those forgotten voices from women in the past that perhaps had been neglected or overlooked or forgotten, you know, after their lifetime. And so I was really keen to do that here with motherhood, and I found it very difficult to find many older poems about motherhood. Partly, I think, because, of course, everything that I addressed while I was talking about She is Fierce and She Will Soar, which is women's lack of opportunity, lack of education, and lack of time, you know, the women's work that sort of rendered it completely impossible for them to have an artistic career, particularly when you're talking about an era in which if you had a family, you might have 9 or 10 children. You know, it was a very, I mean, I find it hard enough with 2 children to find time to fit in anything, you know, creative, and imagine if there was another 7 of them knocking about the house. I mean, I just can't. So there was that, but also I really felt that the subject of motherhood had not been considered, as you said in your introduction, Polly, a proper subject for poetry, not something that was, you know, it's not an epic battle or classical history, or it just was considered small and domestic and in fact niche. I mean, amazingly, Carolyn Cook has edited an anthology called Writing Motherhood, which is fascinating. And in the introduction to that, she talks about Holly McNeish's collection, Nobody Told Me, which is, you know, a huge bestseller, such a touchstone for so many women, and something that I've given to people that, you know, people have spoken to me about. And she found it really hard, apparently, to find a publisher for that, even though she was a really well-established and well-known poet, because it was considered to be a bit niche. And that was, you know, 2014.
Yes, the lady's grumbling again in some sort of way. Yeah, it can feel like that, can't it? I mean, I think something I notice is that, you know, when men or fathers write about the subject, then it suddenly, you know, attracts a certain amount of cachet, and that can kind of spill on into the women writing about it, and the subject generally just kind of gives it a sort of an uplift. And I've noticed
just
that
amazing, isn't it?
But it might be good to, I mean, because when the men have a go, they often do it very well. So
absolutely,
you've got a really lovely example here, by Walter de la Mare.
Yes.
The Birth Night, and it's a short, yes, very lovely poem. I think it's as an example of one of the older ones. It'd be lovely to hear it.
It is, and it's beautiful, and it is the only poem by a man in here, even though, as you say, there are wonderful books, poems by men about parenthood. And if Sam would like me to do fatherhood, I've got quite a few of those squirreled away. if that is an anthology that anyone would like.
Yeah,
this is an unorthodox way of pitching.
Yeah.
So this is The Birth Night by Walter de la Mare. Dearest, it was a night that in its darkness rocked Orion's stars. A sighing wind ran faintly white along the willows, and the cedar boughs laid their wide hands in stealthy peace across the starry silence of their antique moss. No sound, save rushing air, cold, yet all sweet with spring, and in thy mother's arms, couched weeping there, thou, lovely thing. It's just beautiful, you know. I was really pleased to include it, but it's nice for us to open with that, and sort of, which does express that difficulty I found about finding those older poems. And a lot of them were very sad, you know, they were eulogies for children who'd been lost. And this was a book that, you know, was intended as a gift, you know, as a gift for people. And so although there are such affecting poems that deal with those kind of really tragic areas of motherhood, we didn't include them here.
Yeah. I just looking at this poem, you know, it's quite interesting as well that, you know, it's almost like you know, it's that kind of archetypal vision,
Madonna and child,
of the woman and child, and also, you know, calling the baby a thing, and not that that's wrong. It's just it's a way that it's very much from outside the experience, isn't it? And
yes,
and viewing that. I mean, did you feel, because it's beautiful, it really pulls you, doesn't it? I wonder, what do you feel? Did you feel it was sort of sentimental, or it was showing, or showing? It's right on that line, isn't it? It's right on that line.
It has a tranquility that I didn't find easy to access in the early days of motherhood. You know, and it's beautiful. There are, you know, there are moments like that, but actually the baby is crying. couched weeping there.
Yes.
And you know, he still makes it sound very quiet and tranquil and tender and beautiful. But
Yes.
as a mother, that sound of your baby crying induces a kind of wild animal panic that's very difficult to explain. You know, I remember my eldest was a big crier as a baby. She you know, she didn't want to be put down for a year or so. And she would kick off in public a lot. And people would say things like, oh, you know, don't worry, it's all right, we don't mind. And I'd be thinking, I mind. You know, you're very programmed to respond in a really animal instinct way to that, you know, so that you make sure that your baby's looked after. And yet he's saying, oh, you're weeping.
Yes,
So I love it.
So interesting.
It's so peaceful and gorgeous. But I also wonder if he had a poem from the point of view from the mother, I feel like she wouldn't be feeling quite so tranquil, that sort of panicky feeling.
I suppose as that, I mean, that's a sign of the time as well. So he's got, so, you know, now when men tend to write poems about this as fathers, they don't tend to observe the mother doing that job. But I suppose then, I mean, it does highlight kind of how separate the spheres were. I mean, he's talking from an alternate sphere, isn't he? And
absolutely
kind of observing that, and it's so interesting to have that in there, because that is the idealized and very beautiful image that I guess we're sort of all trying to live up to, or we have that, we've internalized that when you first go into the whole shebang.
Absolutely. The thing that lied to me most about motherhood, I feel, was Lady and the Tramp. Seen Lady and the Tramp? Yes. The cradle's rocking and she's singing, and it's every time I watch it, and my children love Lady and the Tramp, I think, oh, and I feel like that sort of sums up the sort of the bliss that, you know, is supposed to surround motherhood. And, you know, and there are blissful moments, but yes. It is another sphere he's talking from.
Yeah, absolutely. It's fascinating to see that. And I must just remind myself of the title of it. But there was a sort of a moment I felt, I think it was about 10 years ago, maybe it was a bit more, when male poets started to write about the experience of fatherhood. And that sort of visceral, I felt often in there, Don Patterson sort of seemed to kickstart it. He wrote about his children in quite a visceral way, and it's on. I just found that was just another sort of really interesting approach. Once they're actually in, once the fathers are in there in the down and dirty, you really kind of do get a whole other angle to it,
which is, you know, it's so wonderful as well. There's a poem by Luke Kennard I love called Crow Baby, which is, you know, the panic of trying to calm a very, very fractious child, which, you know, it's just so beautifully expressed. So I suppose we have to thank the men for letting everyone write about it.
Thanks. Yeah. Yeah. In a way, it broadens the whole subject, I suppose, and then it does become about parenthood. But there will always, would you think, just be something that obviously specific about the mother thing, because it is and I think maybe it's a good moment to kind of think about that. There is this fundamental change in identity which doesn't happen to the father, which happens to the mother.
Absolutely.
Because one person becomes two people, and that is just such an existential craziness, isn't it?
When Sam commissioned me to edit this book, I said, completely unwisely for some reason, I'd really like to write some little bits, you know, some sort of essay is a grandiose term for them, but, you know, a little chunk about my experiences in there. And she said, oh yes, fine. And then of course I was at home homeschooling my children, holding down my other job, and it was impossible to finish a thought or a sentence, or certainly sit and write some nice prose about my experiences. But when I eventually did get a couple of days a week of holiday club in August last year, which saved all of our lives, I think, to a great degree, one of the essays that I wrote was about losing, where are you, and losing that sense of yourself, which I think is something that lots of these poets have written about, really, really, in a way that struck such a chord with me. And I thought, oh, and that's what poetry does so often for me, is that someone will put their finger on something that I had felt but not been able to express.
Yes,
because that's what poets like you, Polly, do. You can show me how I feel.
To that kind of moment of insight. Now, I hope there isn't too much kind of interference. So everybody seems to have decided to start drilling. So I hope
it sounds okay at my end.
It's good. That's all right then. Yeah, no, it's people are maintaining their boats as well. They should. It can be a bit noisy. So just maybe I wonder if it might be interesting just to have a look at a couple of poems around that area. Liz Berry's poem, The Republic of Motherhood, which I sort of feel, I mean, there's been so many poems about the subject, as we've said, latterly, but this to me it's almost like a canonical moment, really, because she just captures the notion that you just go off to another place in a way, and it's sort of strange, and you're going to have to just adapt, grow in
absolutely the mundane, your familiar streets made strange. Those streets that you used to clip-clop through in your heels on the way to work, if indeed you went to work and you wore heels, and all of a sudden you're sort of shambling around them in a cardigan that smells of milk, in a daze of sleeplessness. And it is that you've crossed the border. I think it is just an extraordinary poem, a cathedral of a poem you can live inside. There's so much of it.
Yeah, okay, so I'm going to try and do justice. So, The Republic of Motherhood by Liz Berry. I crossed the border into the Republic of Motherhood and found it a queendom, a wild queendom. I handed over my clothes and took its uniform, its dressing gown and undergarments, a cardigan, soft as a creature smelling of birth and milk. And I lay down in motherhood's bed, the bed I had made but could not sleep in, for I was called at once to work in the factory of motherhood, the owl shift, the graveyard shift, feeding, cleaning, loving, feeding. I walked home, heartsore through pale streets, the coins of motherhood singing in my pockets. Then I soaked my spindled bones in the chill municipal baths of motherhood, watching strands of my hair float from my fingers. Each day I pushed my pram through freeze and blossom, down the wide boulevards of motherhood, where poplars bent their branches to stroke my brow. I stood with my sisters in the queues of motherhood, the weighing clinic, the supermarket, waiting for motherhood's bureaucracies to open their doors. As required, I stood beneath the flag of motherhood and opened my mouth, although I did not know the anthem. When darkness fell, I pushed my pram home again, and by lamplight wrote urgent letters of complaint to the Department of Motherhood, but received no response. I grew sick and was healed in the hospitals of motherhood, with their long closed isolation wards and narrow beds watched over by a fat moon. The doctors were slender and efficient, and when I was well, they gave me my pram again, so I could stare at the daffodils in the parks of motherhood, while winds pierced my breasts like silver arrows. In snowfall, I haunted motherhood's cemeteries, the sweet fallen beneath my feet. Our Lady of the birth trauma, Our Lady of psychosis. I wanted to speak to them, tell them I understood, but the words came out scrambled, so I knelt instead and prayed in the chapel of motherhood, prayed for that whole wild fucking queendom, its sorrow, its unbearable skinless beauty, and all the souls that were in it. I prayed and prayed until my voice was a night cry and sunlight pixelated my face like a kaleidoscope. Wowzers.
It's just extraordinary, isn't it? There's so much in there that's so perfectly expressed. And it is that you have gone somewhere that you are never coming back from.
Mm-hmm.
You know, which I think she expresses so brilliantly.
I love it. I mean, I don't know, why does the kind of allegory with, illusion with kind of communist China resonate?
The totalitarian state.
Why is it? I wonder why we see that.
It's so brilliantly rooted in the actual practical elements of motherhood, the little red book, the bureaucracies, the weighing, the cues. And also when she says, I opened my mouth even though I did not know the anthem, that reminded me of early times at rhyme time in the library, where I thought, sorry, when do we zoom the babies to the moon? How does everyone know what they're doing apart from me? But also I think that feeling that we must all be singing from the hymn sheet, that we must all be saying, oh, it's wonderful, it's the best thing that's ever happened to me. It's, we mustn't break ranks and say, I'm finding this quite smothering or boring or, at times really hard. There is that fall in line, and also the losing of your own identity. You get your uniform, you're only referred to as mum by the health visitor and the nursery workers.
To go from being a person to just literally, I mean, I was just called Lucy's mum. People bring me up and just leave a message for Lucy's mum. And I don't know how you're supposed to, I mean, if you were very young and you hadn't really known anything different, but I think a lot of women now, they're having children later in life, and they've had a professional life and they've been an individual. So I think the seismic shock of that is seismic is
absolutely
the word. It's just the shock that you're no longer an individual in the world's eyes as well as your own.
I remember the first time I walked somewhere without pushing a buggy, and I was like, what do I do with my arms? I don't really, it felt like I was walking strangely. And I think that's what she puts across so well, that there is, a different person comes after, and then you'll find sort of little bits of you peeking out. Also, I think you're just so tired. There's not really time to sort of activate your identity. And part of the thing that I became very interested in while editing this book and She Is Fierce and She Was Sore, because it was, again, women's work, was how women, especially who were mothers, carved out time for creativity. There was that very famous interview with Ishiguro where he says he just goes to his bunker and his wife sort of deals with everything, so he doesn't have to. And I
think that's something. I think in a month he went himself away, and she did all his admin and cooked all his meals and answered the phone. And I know he's a masterful writer, but those are ideal conditions, I have to say.
Yes, they are, absolutely. And how much harder that is to access for anyone who is the primary carer for children. And actually, when I was editing the books, I used to find a lot of beautiful nocturnal poems by women, and I'd always think, this is the only time they get to write because everyone's finally gone down for the night. This is the only time they're on their own. But I do think there is a push-pull between motherhood and creativity that's very interesting. And the more I read about it, the more I've read lots of women saying that actually motherhood made them more creative and galvanized their kind of creative and artistic life in lots of ways. Perhaps I think when you're a mother, you become wildly efficient in a way that you weren't before. The nap time might last 20 minutes or it might last 2 hours, and you've got to fit everything you needed to do into that point, and it's entirely dictated by your baby randomly waking up. So I think you get very good at multitasking and at not messing about, knuckling straight down to things, making the most of those discrete portions of time you do get. So I think there's that.
Sorry, go on. Yeah,
a lot of people who maybe have always wanted to do something creative and have sort of never quite got round to it, suddenly you're very focused.
Yeah.
And a growing child is a real constant physical reminder of the passing of time, which makes you think, oh, if I want to do that, I've got to do it now.
Yeah, and
motivating.
For an artist, that experience, and that's also what Liz Berry is expressing in there as well. It's so profound, as in, a personality reconfiguring experience that is that's kind of what the artist is doing anyway. They're kind of expressing those sorts of seismic moments in your life. So, you know, what poets who might have gone through a war experience, I mean, that's all the material you might ever need, and you're almost precipitated into expressing the crisis that you find yourself in. So it's a wonderful source of creativity, as well as being the you know, a kibosh on your sometimes on your ability to do it. I've got a question here which is interesting. Delicious Babies by Penelope Shuttle. Why did you choose this as the first poem? This is from Paul Charlton. I just thought I'd just lob that into you.
Yeah. Oh, I love that poem, and it's just, it seems to me that it was such a good way in. It's so sort of exuberant and kind of jolly and fun, and it just seemed like just such a wonderful way to open it. In fact, I decided really quite early on that would be the first poem.
Oh, that's interesting.
Which usually I don't decide that. And in fact, this was an easy anthology, like the work of putting things in order. Of course, it's really easy because I start with pregnancy and I go to the empty nest, and then I just sort of slot everything in between. So that bit of the job, which is often, you know, lovely part of the job, but quite a lot of work to sort of get things exactly into the themes that I think they should be and have a sort of flow between them. So it was easy with this one. And really early on when I read that, I thought, this is a good opener.
They have there is that kind of deliciousness and the sort of edibleness about new babies, isn't there, that people do write about or talk about quite a lot. You know, it's sort of almost, you know, you talk about eating your baby, you're saying the sort of you know, affection, the glee about their physical body. They're just
glee is a wonderful word,
yummy, aren't they? And
I think it's something that I saw more with hindsight. I wasn't one of those people who always wanted to hold everyone's babies and was very sort of, you know, eyeing them up on trains and that kind of thing, as someone in Delicious Babies is. But now that my children are older and past those stages, I do sort of look back at pictures of them and I'm like, oh, you know, the squidginess. It's very tactile.
Yes, that's something I wonder as well. That side of it isn't often sort of maybe celebrated as much, you know. So we're talking about other, maybe more intellectual or kind of creative or existential aspects to that, but this physical joy.
There is another actually in here.
Part of the baby thing, even if you only think about it retrospectively. I wonder if that has played to, you know, to be taken seriously as a subject. It's almost like you have to play that down if you go around sort of, you know, going on about their squidgy little knees and everything.
It does have a comic, that one I feel has the sort of comic exuberant feeling. There's another one in here called Sugar Beet, which I think is another one about that sort of the real physical delight of babies and their, you know, squishiness.
Which is, I mean, I think it's really important to bring.
It was important to have pleasure.
And we're not robots just kind of reproducing. It's at the end of the day, it's an animal event, isn't it? You know, it's a body.
Absolutely, what a great phrase.
Yeah, giving birth to, and it's good not to think about that all the time, but it's that's one of the compensations, I suppose. And one of the challenges maybe embracing that animal. We spend so much time being civilized that embracing and being comfortable with the fact that there has been an animal event in your life, and the result is there. That's quite important, and seeing it in poetry is
and so much of, as Liz says in her poem, the work of motherhood, you know, the factory, feeding, cleaning, loving, feeding, the kind of repetition and the wiping is something I come back to a lot. I just feel like parenthood just involves so much wiping. Everything needs to be wiped all the time.
Yeah, I think we've chatted a little bit about that before, haven't we? That in a way, what is mother love? Is it? I think latterly, in the last sort of decades or whatever, it's kind of been, mother love has been amalgamated with domestic goddessness. And so you're expected, the drudgery that in the past, for most middle class mothers, they would have, and upper class, they would have, the drudgery would not have existed. There's not a lot of drudgery in Lady and the Tramp, you know. So you get to participate in the lovely bits of, like, you know, here is my beautiful child.
Someone else comes in and does the wiping.
Yeah, and I did actually, just did from my own experience. I felt that you know, every generation probably has its unfairnesses, but I felt that was an unfairness that had been visited on my experience, was that the two got all muddled up, and you showed your virtue as a mother and how good a mother you were by how much work you were doing, not by just loving, you know, just being, you know, you did work. Yeah, I say, I don't know, I just wonder,
finding
thoughts about that.
Finding the value in that work, I found really difficult over, you know, the homeschooling and the pandemic period, where I felt like I was serving a meal every 15 seconds and clearing up after it. And that felt quite, felt like drudgery. And it was difficult while doing all that to appreciate any of the bigger things that I was doing, like reading to my children and us enjoying books together and talking about things, which was something lovely that we had extra time to do, you know, during that sort of lockdown period that we've now carried on into post-lockdown. Are we post-lockdown? But, you know, into life. So there was so much that was really lovely about spending all that time with my children, but it could easily be, my appreciation of that could easily be swamped by the sheer work of the wiping and the feeding and the washing them and the laundry and the, you know, all the things that I was doing at the same time as trying to work and do their schoolwork. And so these poems just were such a wonderful way for me to make me raise my eyes from, you know, the washing up and appreciate them.
Yes, and see the wonder of it, because I mean, in Liz Berry's poem, she touches on it. It's like, you know, she kind of frames it as an almost religious thing. There is the sort of the wonder that's the kind of, you know, gobsmacking, wordless sort of wow, you know, which you almost need religious language to sort of express in those strange times. And there's another poem which would be great if you'd read, which has different kind of shock and awe and wonder, and is a wonderfully funny poem. Caroline Bird's poem, Little Children, which I think exemplifies wonderfully the shock of what a child actually is.
Yes,
you know, we saw the version at the beginning in Walter de la Mare's, you know, perfect little vignette there, and she gets right to what they really are.
I just love this poem. There's another in here as well by Denya Stone about a 4.5-year-old, and one of the lines in that is, she's a bit of a laugh that ends up in court, which I just thought is such a perfect poem.
Yeah,
like my daughter is about to turn 5, and I just thought, yeah, that's it. But this is Little Children by Caroline Bird. Politically, they're Puritans. They gasp at nudity like it's 1912. They're shocked by minor offences such as chip stealing. 98% possessing zero faith in the concept of rehabilitation for adults. As far as little children are concerned, forgivable mistakes occur before 16. After that, you're on your own. Their stance against marital fidelity is Victorian, and their position on divorce aligns with the Vatican City. Nuance is irrelevant to the infant moralist. They sit in plastic umpire chairs at the dinner table, shouting out unintelligible scores. They're violent. They'll headbang a breast or stuff a sticky hand up a skirt and then just amble away like raging misogynists. They won't even allow their mothers to bring home a sexy stranger on a Friday night. They disapprove of drugs like Tory neighbours. Their standpoint on drunkenness is predictably brutal, especially for women. It's like the 60s never happened. They believe every adult should be locked into a sexless, yet eternal marriage, never slip up or forget even a lunchbox, and be completely transparent and open to feedbacks 24/7. They're hypocrites. They spy on you in the toilet. Parents aren't permitted even the smallest private perversion, Yet a child can secretly urinate in a drawer for 3 weeks until the smell warrants investigation. Their relentless indignation, their fascist vision of the perfect family. Little children are like the czarist autocracy of pre-revolution Russia. Their soft hands have never known work. Their reign is unearned. On behalf of my younger self, I apologize to my parents for the simplistic, ill-informed and ignorant questions I hurled concerning their romantic and sexual life choices. How could you do that to Dad? How could you do that to Mum? I was operating under a false consciousness, responding to an imagined society governed by laws I'd gleaned from picture books about tigers coming to tea. I had no right, no credibility. Imagine bellowing criticism from the stalls after seeing 2 minutes of a play. Imagine expecting universal loyalty whilst flinging spaghetti hoops at the wall. Imagine having such confidence in your innate philosophy of love. We kneel to tie the laces of their unfeasibly tiny shoes. It's just brilliant. I love it. It's the spaghetti hoops at the wall and also the plastic umpire chairs. That is so perfect. It's that IKEA high chair we all had.
Absolutely.
Wipes clean like a dream. I just
and that you loved it. The notion that you in the end you happily kneel. I mean, you just get on and they're so tiny and there's something so so overwhelmingly powerful about something so tiny that you
the tiny tyrant.
The tiny tyrant.
It's perfect.
Yeah. I think it does express so wonderfully that shock that you spend your time being a lovely liberal professional individual and you realize that it's very atavistic. It's like right back to basics and all of the things that you thought were agreed.
Absolutely. And I think as well there are things about you consider yourself to be quite a calm person. Perhaps I think I considered myself to be quite a calm, patient, non-confrontational person. You wouldn't catch me doing road rage and that sort of thing. And the school run can reduce the best of us to a howling banshee about which you feel guilty afterwards. But of course you do, your children behave in that way, and of course that's how they are, and she expresses that so beautifully. And I just think it's lovely to read about spaghetti hoops being flung at the wall in poetry. How absolutely perfect.
And it's another example of the experience feeding really wonderful art, even though the fact of the experience will I'm sure have been as difficult for Caroline as everybody else. It's such a splitting, isn't it? I mean, I don't know if the motherhood experience is kind of about that. It's being able to be comfortable with things either not being sort of clearly cut and you having to just decide things without higher reference, or being able to sustain black and white at the same time. Not
believing 10 impossible things before breakfast, like the White Queen says in Alice in Wonderland.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think that's it. And there were so many poems in here that made me feel that I wasn't alone at a time when, we were all alone. We're all locked in our houses, and I was editing this in the first kind of very extreme lockdown in which we were going out for our 1 hour of exercise around the block and diving into the hedge if we passed anyone. And so that those communities and networks of support that are, the village it's supposed to take to raise a child had been severed. Those ties have been severed. And I think for people who had young babies over this past year, it must have been unimaginably difficult to navigate those, especially first children, those kind of very confusing, very frightening days where you just want to sit with somebody who's every bit as exhausted as you, who's going to go, I don't know whether they're crying either, and to be cut off from that you know, it was very difficult even at my later stage. And I just felt that there was a community in these pages that was missing from us in the real world, that had been taken from us. And it felt really comforting. I think that's what poetry does in any scenario. But
yes,
I felt there were generations and generations of women sharing their experiences with me. But I'd love, Polly, to ask you to read Baby Group, please.
Ah, yes.
On that subject.
Yes, because we've got there's two types of sort of community, isn't there? There's a community that you find in poetry, which is a revelation. I mean, overall, the kind of collection that you've got here, it just shows how kind of motherhood is an expanding experience, isn't it? I mean, yourself and your life kind of gets bigger, and you've got the, you know, you just see the wealth of the different kinds of experience and how people are articulating those. So that's wonderful. And then, of course, yes, there's the real people that, yeah, you meet at sort of all the places you never imagined, didn't even know existed.
The drafty church halls.
The drafty church halls, absolutely.
And this as well, Polly, this was one that I had earmarked for years and years. Ever since I read it, I knew, you know, but as soon as I got the commission, there were 6 poems, I think, on the list that I was like, they're in. And this was on there. I just loved it.
Yeah, well, and actually I noticed I have a similar thing in here to Liz. I talk about Lady of the Birth Trauma. Isn't that interesting? Yes. It's kind of, suddenly the other women that you see around you when you're in that sort of stunned kind of state, they do almost take on a kind of kind of mythical, legendary sort of quality. Baby Group. Save me from my loneliness, lady of the scar, lady of the birth trauma and the absent husband. Distract me in the rain, lady of the Asda fairy cake, vacantly sipping as angels circle in baby walkers. And you, lady of perfection, Boudica of Kashmir, whose baby's shoes are shiny, whose ribbons reek of adoration, though we may never say more than, hello, isn't she lovely? I'm glad you exist. You appear on a grey morning, right on time, smart as a sail on bewildered waters.
It's just, as soon as I read it, I thought I can see every single one of these women in my mind's eye. It's so perfect. And those people who come into your life actually for a really short period of time when you're both going through the same thing.
Yeah.
Are so important in that moment, even if, you know, your relationship doesn't sort of endure. There was a woman who absconded from a Pilates class, baby Pilates class with me, when neither of our children were remotely behaving and everyone else was doing terribly cunning things to their cause. And both our children were just having absolutely none of it. I think they were probably 7 or 8 months. And we ended up just going, oh God, sorry, and leaving and going to the pub for an afternoon. I think I saw her a couple of times after that, and then we moved out of the area. You know, we never kept in touch. But she, you know, she gave me something that day, that afternoon, that was worth more than all the Pilates in the world, although my core would tell you differently. And it was so, I found it so particularly moving to think about those experiences during a time when we couldn't have those experiences with each other.
Yeah,
I did feel when this book came out in March that it was in my way, you know, I hoped it would be a tribute and a gift to, I felt that the past year had been really, really hard to mother during, you know, I hoped there was something here like offering like a little bunch of flowers to everyone who'd done that, to say, not only do I get it, but all of these women get it too.
Yes.
You know,
yeah.
Whether they were writing 100 years ago.
It is. It's sort of, you know. It's it is. It's a burst of all the different ways you can talk about it and think about it, and it's joyful, which is that is kind of what we've been sort of lacking, isn't it?
That was what I needed so much. Even though I'd be shouting at my children, "Can you please go and do something in the garden so that I can read these poems about how much I love you and cry on my own?" While making notes of the pages, so I could.
I mean, that is phenomenal. It is really noticeable, and I'm sure you've noticed it too. Just how much the lockdowns have depended really on mothers being able, to work, depended on mothers being able to suddenly sprout all these other dimensions, become teachers and full-time cooks and do full-time, so it has rested very much on mothers. And I don't know what you think about that. I mean, are you different as a result of, do you feel you're a different mother or a different person, either after doing the book and after doing it over this time?
I think there were things, I did feel that mothers in particular, and working mothers to a great degree, were just the shock absorbers of the nation. It did feel that there wasn't really any understanding of what was being asked, all the plates that we were spinning. And I know as well, obviously, there were lots of fathers who were very involved and who were, also put in these very difficult positions where you had to, and it's just, but I do feel it landed disproportionately on women. The white hot rage of my WhatsApp groups certainly suggested that. And of course, women's careers often take a step back. They're often the ones who are working part-time or flexibly, as they tend to be the primary care, although that isn't the case universally. It was very hard to be everything to your children, because once your children are at school, they get so much from other sources, from the wider family, from their peers, from their teachers, and to be everything to them during a time that was, frightening and unprecedented. How we miss precedented times was really, as we all know, as I don't need to tell anyone who did it, incredibly challenging. And I found strength in these words. I found inspiration. It was so difficult to see the good parts. There was a point in March where the children had gone back to school and I was working on something, and for the first time I realized that I missed them, because I hadn't had the opportunity to miss them, because I've basically been in the same room as them for 7 out of the preceding 9 months or what have you, and I cried, because I just thought, oh, we're not broken, it was just a lot. And I found that the experience of reading the poems, especially the ones actually of the empty nest, because this isn't just about pregnancy and babies, it goes right through having teenage children and children leaving home. And I found myself really bawling over, poems about enormous teenage boys who were about to leave home. I've got 2 tiny daughters, and my nest could not have been more full. There was nothing about my experience that I, but yet I needed to see the full spread of experience to remind myself not to wish away, although I was wishing many of those days away, not to wish away my children as they are now.
I think there's a lot about being a mother and being a parent, probably, and being maybe specifically, particularly being a mother, is that you are storing up those moments. You're almost taking snapshots to remember later. I remember actually when I got married, my friend who'd gotten married several years before, and she kind of cascades knowledge down, and she just said, you'll be so stressed on the day about what everyone else is doing and if they're having a nice time. What you mustn't do is miss it, because you can miss the whole thing being worried about the minutiae. So what you have to do is take mental snapshots, almost as if you had a camera. Just look at this, look at that, and file it away for later. And I think
that was so much what I felt the poems helped me do.
Yes, don't they just? You can enjoy all the, enjoy and think about the things to come if you're at an earlier stage, and remember those, like we have, thinking about the yumminess. We're both at the yumminess stage, but we can remember it.
I always think that parenting would be vastly improved if once a month that your children were a different age. So once a month your children would be a teenager, and you go, oh God, I missed them when they were squishy. Or once a month they would be toddlers again, and you'd think, I just want to go to the toilet on my own. I feel like you would,
when you can do magic, Hannah.
Yeah.
You can
that would just be really, really motivating.
Yeah,
you treasure the bit you were in more for seeing the upside and the downside of a different bit.
But in the meantime, we've got the poets to kind of time capsule us back.
Time travel.
Yeah. And we've got as well a couple of poems that or some poems in here that look at the mother, you know, so from the child's point of view. And I thought it would be nice to maybe sort of come to a conclusion with one of those.
I've got. Shall I read what my kids will write about me, because I love that?
Think that's
So this is a real favourite, and actually it's January Gill O'Neill, and there were about 5 of hers that I wanted to put down. I got it down to 2, but I just love this. And this is called "What My Kids Will Write About Me in Their Future Tell-All Book," which is a terrifying thought, especially for anyone who's, you know, been involved in the creation of books. They will say that no was my favourite word, more than stop or eat or love. That some mornings I'd rather stay in bed, laptop on lap, instead of making breakfast. That I'd rather write than speak. They will say they have seen me naked, front side, back side, none of which were my good side. They will say I breastfed too long. In the tell-all book my kids will write, they'll tell how I let them wrinkle like raisins in the bathtub so I could watch Big Pappy at the plate. They'll talk about how I threw out their artwork, the watercolours and turkey hands, when I thought they weren't looking and when I knew they were. They'll say that my voice was a slow torture, that my singing caused them permanent hearing loss. In the tell-all books my kids will write, as surely as I am writing this, they will say I cut them off mid-sentence just because I could. They'll tell you how I got down on my knees, growling my low guttural disapproval, how I grabbed their ears, pinched the backs of their arms, yet they never quite knew who was sadder for it. They'll quote me saying, I cry in the shower, it's the only safe place I can go. They'll say she was our sweetest disaster. They will say I loved them so much it hurt. It's just got everything. The line in that
kind of lump, isn't it? That
I know. I well up every time I read that last bit as well. But the line in that really, there were two bits: throwing away the artwork when they knew they could see me. I mean, especially over homeschooling. I mean, my goodness, we were drowning under the sea of arts and crafts. And the other, I cut them off mid-sentence just because I could. You know, I just thought, oh, yes.
Well, there's so few little kind of powerful moments, I guess, you know, as we've seen from some of the other poems, you know, your little victories or your little kind of assertions, you know,
yes,
not the worst thing. Oh, hang on, we've got okay. Oh, we've got a little question here. I was delighted to find your collection. Oh, a little bunch of flowers has to be in every child's locker to know, to feel of their beginning to come. Thank you. Paul Charlton. Now that's a little bit. I think he's saying I was delighted to find your collection, a little bunch of flowers. He loves it. He loves it. So
that's lovely to hear. Thank you so much.
Yeah, that's wonderful.
It's such a pleasure to do, and then it's just such editing an anthology, and it's such a treat. And I'm so passionate about all the poems. And then when someone gets in touch to say, you know, and I feel like I can't take it, you know, it's the poet who's done the magic and done the work, you know, and taken us to that magical place. But
well, it's a wonderful achievement, and I'm going because we've only got about a minute left. So I want to just remind everyone that this is the book, and I hope we've taken you on a bit of a journey into it, and just how wonderful it is. And you can get it from your local bookshop. And yes, Anna, tell us what you're going to be doing next. What's next on your...
So next I've done one which is more for children, actually, though I think adults will enjoy it as well, which is Wonder, the Natural History Museum.
Oh, wow.
Coming out in September, which has been so much fun and so different.
Another big topic. Yeah,
absolutely. Another very big topic.
Wonderful to talk to you about this.
Thank you so much.
By the book,
it's
people.
Been such a pleasure.
Thank you.